The phantasmagoria that is ancient myth can seem like a dizzying mishmash of bizarre imagery and otherworldly characters that is daunting in its complexity and apparent haphazardness. How in the world is it possible to make sense of such traditional stories? The historian Paul Vane summarized the problems inherent in the study of myth in almost nihilistic terms. Quote, "What is to be made of this mass of nonsense? How can all this have a meaning, a motivation, a function, or at least a structure? The question of whether myths have any authentic content can never be put in positive terms." End of quote. A decisive key to making sense of ancient myth and religion is recognizing the fundamental role played by the planets Venus and Mars. In the recent book, Egypt Under the Stars, we presented a wealth of evidence that Horus, the king of the gods, is to be identified with the planet Mars. This identification is attested as early as the New Kingdom, circa 1500 BCE, but there is much reason to believe that it dates to prehistory. Thus it is that, in texts from circa 2900 BCE, Horus is explicitly identified with the star. The goddess Hathor, on the other hand, is conceptualized as the eye of Horus, and in our opinion is to be identified with the planet Venus. We will examine the cult of the Egyptian mother goddess for clues as to the prehistoric origins of the relationship of Venus and Mars. The origins of Hathor are lost to prehistory. Susan Hollis, in her detailed study of the leading Egyptian goddesses, observed of Hathor, quote, "Little is known with any certainty about her possible beginnings and origins." End of quote. A point agreed upon by all Egyptologists is that her name denotes the house of Horus. Indeed, the pictograph for Hathor depicts an enclosure-like structure with the falcon god inside. The central question for researchers is how to understand the underlying meaning of Hathor's name. Egyptologists readily confess their bewilderment on this issue. Most scholars refer it to metaphor. Maria Betro, for example, argues that the goddess's name references the amorphous sky that housed the sun. Quote, "House of Horus probably indicates the deep skies in which the falcon god resides." End of quote. Hollis herself offers the implausible suggestion that a local house of Horus worship eventually morphed over time into a particular and related deity, in this case, Hathor. Central to Hollis's discussion, as in so much of Egyptology itself, is the belief that local religious beliefs were projected onto the celestial landscape. We reject this entire line of thought outright. Indeed, the true situation is exactly the reverse. It is the celestial stimuli that came first and inspired the human attempts to memorialize these extraordinary events with myth, religion, and rituals. As above, so below was the guiding principle that governed Egyptian religion. As before, so always was equally fundamental to all religious systems, i.e., the stubborn belief that whatever happened during the momentous events of creation was normative for all time, and as such was encoded into all primary human institutions such as religion, kingship rituals, funerary practices, marriage ceremonies, monumental architecture, etc. Mircea Eliade said it best, quote, "Myth narrates a sacred history. It relates an event that took place in primordial time, the fabled time of the beginnings. Myth, then, is always an account of creation. It relates how something was produced, began to be. Myth tells only of what really happened, which manifested itself completely. The actors in myths are supernatural beings. They are known primarily by what they did in the transcendent times of the beginnings. Because myth relates the guest of supernatural beings and the manifestation of their sacred powers, it becomes the exemplary model for all significant human activities. When the missionary and ethnologist C. Strelo asked the Australian Arunta why they performed certain ceremonies, the answer was always, because the ancestors so commanded it." End of quote. What was true of the Australian natives was true of all early human cultures. The fundamental data of ancient myth, religion, and ritual reflect the species-wide obsession to record and/or reproduce the sacred events of creation, the latter of which were decidedly astronomical in nature. Granted that this was indeed the case, what does this mean for our investigation into the meaning of Hathor's name? Egyptologists have long observed that the Egyptian language was concrete in nature, typically representing natural objects with pictographs depicting those objects. If so, one can be relatively certain that when the ancient scribes described Hathor as the house of Horus, that is exactly what they meant. How then are we to understand the mother goddess Hathor as an enclosure of the Horus-star? Those viewers who are familiar with the writings of David Talbott and myself will know that we have been arguing for some 40 years now that Venus formerly appeared as a towering star in the sky with the diminutive Mars set in the center. It is in this wholly concrete sense, then, that Hathor Venus was perceived to house the god Horus within her. Mars quite literally appeared to reside in the center of Venus during one particularly memorable phase in the history of the polar configuration. While this conclusion is jarring at first, Mars as an outer planet cannot appear in front of Venus in the present arrangement of the solar system. It can be supported by a wealth of evidence, much of which has been presented by Talbott and myself elsewhere. Suffice it to say that a brief review of the primary symbols associated with Hathor will reveal that each and every one was conceptualized as encircling or housing Horus. Hathor was early on represented as a serpent. This idea is evident in the following coffin text. Quote, "Coming into existence at the beginning, Hathor created land in her form as a primeval serpent." End of quote. The goddess's identification with the serpent is one of the oldest ideas in Egyptian religion and constitutes a fundamental aspect of the cult of the mother goddess. One Egyptologist put it this way, quote, "We are left to think that the uraeus serpent form in which many goddesses were incarnate was an essential vehicle for approaching the divine in its feminine aspect." End of quote. Now here is a fascinating situation, one which all psychoanalysts and Egyptologists fail to explain. How is it that the very concept of the feminine, or the mother goddess, came to be embodied in a serpent, the latter representing one of the most dangerous and terrifying animals for Homo sapiens? Even though Egyptologists readily acknowledge the importance of the goddess as a serpent symbol, not one has ever offered a satisfactory explanation of its origin. Yet the answer is patently obvious. According to the pyramid and coffin text, the mother goddess formerly took on the appearance of a raging serpent dragon during the chaotic period prior to creation, in which she attempted to destroy mankind. Total disaster was avoided and order restored only when the serpent dragon returned to encircle Horus. The Egyptian hieroglyph which encoded this history literally shows an Orobus-like serpent encircling Horus. Much the same image is recorded in a papyrus from 1000 BCE. Here a serpent serves as the enclosure of Horus. The archetypal mythological motif identifying the mother goddess as a serpentine enclosure housing the Horus-star, hitherto virtually unexplored, represents a decisive key to the proper understanding of Egyptian religion. Hathor was elsewhere identified with the Eye of Horus. This idea is most familiar in the New Kingdom text, The Destruction of Mankind, preserved in a temple of Seti I from about 1500 BCE. Although this text has been much historicized and localized, it still preserves archaic motifs. There, Hathor is described as having been dispatched by the ancient sun god to wage war on mankind, ostensibly for rebelling against the rule of the great god. Hathor is explicitly described as taking on the appearance of a fire-spewing serpent and wading in the blood of mankind. This testimony, in turn, can be compared with literary traditions from ancient Mesopotamia and elsewhere that describe the planet Venus in strikingly similar terms, i.e. as a terrifying agent of sky-borne disaster, one prone to assuming a fire-spewing serpentine form. It was in the latter guise, according to the archaic traditions preserved in the Sumerian text known as the Exaltation of Inanna, that the warmongering planet goddess rained fire from heaven. Quote, "Like a dragon you have deposited venom on the land. When you roar at the earth like thunder, no vegetation can stand up to you. A flood descending from its mountain, O foremost one, you are Inanna of heaven and earth, raining the fanned fire down upon the nation, when mankind comes before you in fear and trembling at your tempestuous radiance." End of quote. Here it is the planet Venus that is raining fire and destruction from the sky. The celestial context of the imagery in question could hardly be more self-evident or unequivocal. The catastrophic rampage of the eye is first recorded in the pyramid text, albeit in elusive fashion. In the coffin text, we read that the terrifying eye goddess rages while spewing fire and storm. Quote, "I am the fiery eye of Horus, which went forth terrible, lady of slaughter, greatly awesome." End quote. Alas, the eye eventually is calmed and returns to her rightful place upon Horus's head, where she henceforth resides as the uprearing cobra, the so-called Uraeus serpent. Already in the pyramid text, Horus is said to reside within his eye. The latter clearly conceptualizes a fiery serpent. Quote, "He has come to you, O nut crown. He has come to you, O fiery serpent. He has come to you, O great one, for he is Horus encircled with the protection of his eye." End of quote. Suffice it to say that the image of Horus encircled by a serpentine eye is indistinguishable from the Serpentine Hathor as the house of Horus. The locus classicus of the Horus-star, according to the pyramid text, was the Akhet, hence the god's name Har-Akhet, reverberating through 3 millennia of Egyptian history. The concept of the Akhet stands at the very heart of ancient Egyptian ideas of celestial geography and funerary symbolism, for it is within this celestial structure that the supreme mystery of Egyptian religion takes place, namely the transfiguration of the deceased king into an Ak, after which he will endure forever thereafter as an imperishable star. Yet if scholars are agreed as to the Akhet's paramount importance in Egyptian cosmology and religion, there is little consensus as to what it originally represented or how it is to be understood from the standpoint of human experience or natural science. Now here's a truly remarkable situation. How is it possible that Egyptologists are unable to point to an obvious celestial prototype or tangible structure for what is arguably the single most important cosmological concept in all of Egyptian religion? And if this is indeed the case, what does this say about the theoretical foundation of modern Egyptology in general? Hathor is early on associated with the Akhet. One epithet describes the goddess as the Great Akhet. The related word Akhet, determined with the Uraeus sign, denotes the fire-spewing serpent associated with the royal crown. This archaic concept is evident in spell 256 from the pyramid text, wherein the Uraeus serpent is expressly identified with the mother goddess, there invoked by the name Ernutet. Quote, "The flaming blast of my Uraeus is that of Ernutet who is upon me." End of quote. Elsewhere in the pyramid text, it is said that the sun god made his glorious appearance in unison with the Akhet serpent. Quote, "Re arises his Uraeus upon him." End of quote. Such passages encode the archaic idea that the ancient sun god, as Re or Horus, made his inaugural appearance together with the Uraeus serpent. To be more precise, the ancient sun god made his inaugural appearance within the serpent goddess. Quote, "Praise to you, Ra, Lord of the sky, Horus of the east, praise to you as you rise in the coiled serpent." End of quote. The word Akhet, spelled like the previous word, but with the I as a determinative, denotes the eye of Horus. The eye of Horus, in turn, shares a fundamental affinity with the Uraeus serpent. Witness the following passage from the coffin text, wherein the falcon god is made to announce, quote, "I am Horus, I am king in Chemis, I created my eye in flame, I made my eye a living serpent." End of quote. As is evident from the passages quoted, the Eye of Horus was commonly conceptualized as being serpentine in appearance and flame-like in nature. This imagery, in turn, dovetails perfectly with the evidence presented earlier, wherein we saw that the eye was described as a fire-spewing celestial body, one that presented a serpentine form and eventually came to encircle the Horus-star as a headband or crown. Inasmuch as Akhet was one of the many names for this crown-like enclosure, it would appear that we are close to identifying the celestial prototype for the ever-elusive cosmic Akhet. This, in fact, is precisely our claim. The original celestial prototype for the Akhet was simply a fiery enclosure circumscribed around the Horus-star by the Serpentine mother goddess. In our very first article, Talbott and I emphasized the theoretical importance of anomalous traditions or imagery. Quote, ancient statements appearing to contradict elementary experience or logic are a key to discovery. End of quote. It is difficult to imagine a more anomalous idea than a serpentine crown. What pharaoh in his right mind would think it sensible to tie a poison-spewing cobra around his head? And yet analogous ideas will be found around the globe. Sumerian temple hymns from roughly the same period address Inanna Venus as a cobra-like snake associated with the royal crown. So too, in Mesoamerica, gods and kings depicted themselves with serpents protruding from their royal headdresses. A detailed comparison of the Egyptian and Mesoamerican serpentine headdresses reveals striking parallels. Such remarkable convergences have precious little to do with day-to-day life in ancient Egypt and/or Mesoamerica, much less biology or ophiology. Rather, such imagery reflects extraordinary celestial events involving a serpentine Venus and her manifold interactions with the king of the gods, Horus Mars. In the final analysis, the Egyptian traditions attached to the serpentine mother goddess Hathor point to an alien sky at the very dawn of human civilization.